It's time for another remake of an early video, as our first exploration of Slowbro's competitive history was uploaded October 22nd, 2017, so early into Generation 7 that it was nearly a month before Ultra Sun and Moon's release. Now we are several years into Generation 9, and Slowbro has not only featured in every gen, but it had a second form join the party in Gen 8 and 9, Galarian Slowbro. That means we've got a lot to cover, so we're jumping right in to answer the question, how great were Slowbro and Galarian Slowbro actually? Slowbro was uniquely threatening among Gen 1's slew of psychics. It could become one of the scariest Pokemon in the game because it possessed one of the strongest boosting moves of any generation, Amnesia, which by virtue of Gen 1's special attack and special defense being combined into a singular special stat meant that rather than the +2 special defense boost we know the move to provide in Gen 2 and beyond, here it provided a +2 to both special attack and special defense. Slowbro was the original bulky Calm Mind sweeper, except it got 2 Calm Minds in one turn, referred to as Toby Bro. As created by a player named Wintermute in the early 2000s, it became one of the most well-known sets named after users in competitive history, right up there with Crocoon. Slowbro was a perfect candidate for the boost, as not only did Amnesia shore up and render excellent its subpar special in a jiffy, especially with its great HP, but that same HP in conjunction with its outstanding defense meant you weren't going to easily be breaking it on the physical side either, and if it really wanted to become unbreakable, it could slot Reflect in its 4th move slot. That slot usually went to Thunder Wave though, as this allowed Slowbro to be useful early in the game, before it was ready to commit to the protracted Amnesia Rest Go for Sweep cycle. The threat to Pokemon like Exeggutor, Starmie, and Zapdos was also major in helping Slowbro overcome its main flaw, its Snorlax tier speed. Funnily enough, Slowbro's low speed was an advantage in that it gave it a very low crit rate, one of very few Pokemon that had a lower crit rate than later gens. Now, this doesn't sound like an advantage, but in Gen 1, if you crit, you ignore the boost that you have, so a critting Slowbro would actually hit less hard than a +6 Slowbro. In this sense, Slowbro was thankful for Gen 1's speed-based crits. Slowbro also had 2 amazing stabs to choose from, Surf and Psychic. Surf was the standard for its slightly higher base power and 8 more PP, which could be helpful since boosts in Gen 1 topped out at 999, and as strong as that was, there were still several Pokemon that could potentially stall it out, so the extra PP was useful. But Psychic had the benefit of the 30% special drop rate, making Slowbro hit even harder and letting it break through these stalling attempts from the likes of Starmie. As a bonus, another unique Gen 1 mechanic, man, Slowbro was really full of these, though it doesn't have such a reputation, was that if 2 paralyzed Pokemon faced off, the slower one could become faster if it either boosted its own stats or dropped the opponent's, as long as both Pokemon remained on the field. This meant that if paralyzed Slowbro faced paralyzed Alakazam and used Amnesia, Slowbro would be faster on the following turn, but if Zam switched out and then back in, it would be faster again. That's where Psychic came in. Even once Slowbro had maxed out its Amnesias, Psychic still gave it the opportunity to go first, crucially allowing it to get rest or another hit off. To further abuse this mechanic, some players even use the +1 defense at a time withdraw, giving it another boosting option to go first against paralyzed opponents, instead of the immediate yet flat +2 defense of Reflect. Now, while Slowbro had the potential to take over battles like just about nothing else, it was also flawed, most notably with its reliance on sitting there asleep for healing with rest. This gave the opponent a lot of opportunities to attack, and this made Slowbro a crit magnet. This was especially bad when facing Starmie and its Thunderbolt, given Starmie's amazing 22.46% crit rate, as these were not good odds for Slowbro. Even Thunderbolt Chansey could be a problem with its 9.77% crit rate. And remember, these Pokemon aren't exactly rare in combination with each other. You don't even need Thunderbolt spam to naturally be decently equipped into Slowbro either. Most teams have at least one boom, often multiple, and whichever combination of Snorlax, Exeggutor, Cloyster, or even Gengar, who also had a high crit rate Thunderbolt by the way, would, even if not downing Slowbro itself, leaving it in range for a revenge kill from something like Tauros, especially since in the first 3 gens, the turn ends when a Pokemon faints, meaning that a faster explosion prevents the slower opponent from moving. So, unlike in Gen 4 and beyond, Slowbro couldn't just rest off any booms aimed at it. Of course, speaking of Thunderbolts, Slowbro was the most terrified out of any Gen 1 Pokemon of the mighty Tauros rivaling Zapdos. Now, players often paired Slowbro with Rhydon to make sure they had Zapdos covered, but that brings us to another issue, which is that Rhydon's Earthquake actually 3-hit KO'd Slowbro, meaning that once Slowbro was inevitably forced to rest, it was checked by Rhydon of all things, unless it ran Reflect or Withdraw, but then it lacked Thunder Wave and was thus completely hapless before going for the Amnesia. Though given how you wanted to preserve Slowbro for a late game surprise, this wasn't necessarily bad. Although eventually there were several players who liked using Slowbro more aggressively early game as a sort of wall breaker, reaping better results than when they tried to be more careful with managing the ideal switch. This is Slowbro in a nutshell. While it can be played around, it's also perfectly capable of turning the tables on just about any opponent with the right team and play. With that more aggressive approach, it managed to even withstand the rise of Victory Bell, whose auto-crit Razor Leaf was the worst enemy of an Amnesia-spamming water type. Ultimately, Gen 1 Slowbro demanded a lot of its user, but also potentially rewarded them like nothing else. It was very good in OU, but it also extended its talents to Ubers, where it was actually much better, one of the tier's most important Pokemon. It was still a great sweeper in spite of its flaws, but here's the thing, if Mewtwo lacked Thunderbolt, as it often did with Psychic Blizzard or Mono Psychic coverage, Slowbro was the best answer to it in the game, turning the scariest Pokemon of all time into potential sweep fodder, no biggie. Oh, and a boosted Slowbro had no problems with its Surf cutting right through Mew either. Mew had to run Boom to do anything, and even if it did, trading Slowbro for Mew was a massive help for your own Mew. Gen 1 Slowbro, for all its problems, was a unique, amazing Pokemon that was actually better in the metagame with the 2 original Ubers. And speaking of original Ubers, I sure wish I had a Mewtwo card, like a nice, nostalgic, slabbed one. That's another nostalgic card that I never got as a kid. But fortunately, this video is sponsored by Arena Club. Arena Club is the best place to go to bid, sell, trade, or purchase high-graded slabs of cards. There are many auction websites that sell slabs, but Arena Club is the only one that integrates one of the funnest parts of collecting cards into their system, which is trading. One of my favorite features of this website is if you obtain a card on Arena Club, it is transferred to your showroom, where you can either retrieve it right away, or you can use it to trade cards with other users. It's almost like it stays digital until you tell Arena Club to send it to you. It's very safe and easy. And also, unlike other auction websites, there's no buyer's premium, there's no hidden costs. What you bid is what you pay for, period. Arena Club is the most trusted name in the card collecting hobby and is backed by Hall of Fame baseball player Derek Jeter. They have graded cards from every grading company you can think of, especially PSA. In fact, I use their website to obtain a card that I've always wanted as a kid. That's right, a PSA graded Gyarados. I was so happy to score this, you have no idea. Alright, look, I was around when the base set released as a kid, but I wasn't lucky enough to get any of the rare cards, so this is a long time coming for me. This is the future of the card collecting hobby, and I'm all for it. So if you want to buy or sell some sick Pokemon slabs and also support the channel to help us produce more content, you can go to arenaclub.com/fallswipe to start bidding, trading, or selling. And thank you so much to Arena Club for sponsoring this video. Gen 2 split the special stat in 2, and while Slowbro enjoyed its solid new base 100 special attack, it had to say goodbye to the nearly meager special defense only Amnesia. It didn't have much it could do in OU, as in early Gen 2, it was used with Growl as an answer on certain specific hardcore stall teams to counter Machamp more reliably than Starmie, while also slowing down Curselax. But this faded over time. Ultimately, it wasn't Starmie you preferred over it, it was Suicune. Gen 2 Slowbro was more of a UU Pokemon, and there it was one of the best Pokemon in the metagame. Its dual stabs threatened just about every offensive Pokemon in the tier to some extent, and its recovery was amplified by not just leftovers, but Sleep Talk being able to call rest, which also ensured it was passive while asleep. Alternatively, it could swap out Psychic for Thunder Wave, whose paralysis spread enabled all manner of hard-hitting teammates. It also meant that it could actually stay in on the terrifying Scyther, as it could take an HP bug, and as opposed to the now standard dual stab set, Slowbro now actually threatened it. Slowbro faced a lot of stalemates, as if you wanted to switch into Slowbro safely, you had to do so with a Pokemon capable of going the distance. This often meant that Slowbro could get into extended duels against Hypno or Blastoise, or its new twin, Slowking, or well, other Slowbro. Though these were often the best option, it wasn't just these Pokemon, but if you had the likes of say Blossom or Ampharos, you weren't running an all-out offensive team. And if you were running an all-out offense team that didn't have the luxury of slowing things down against Slowbro, you were in trouble because of how obnoxious it was to switch into. Slowbro Slowbro was far and away the superior Slow Twin because of its great physical bulk that let it take on a bevy of major attackers, namely Grand Bull, which it pressured with its dual stabs for a 3-hit KO on Piloswine and Dojiro. When eventually Aerodactyl was dropped into the tier, Slowbro was one of the finest answers as well. It was an essential part of the tier, one of its most crucial defensive staples, and yet it was never passive. Its effortless threat was a major part of why it was so good defensively. In Gen 3, Slowbro gained Calm Mind, but it certainly wasn't going to be breaking into OU. Slow, affected by sand and spikes, no reliable healing, it certainly wasn't going to be matching OU's defining Calm Mind Suicune, and Slowbro's advantages like Thunder Wave weren't nearly enough to bridge that massive gap. Well, that's fine, because at least it returned to UU, right? Nope, with Calm Mind, Slowbro was effectively the Suicune of UU, except even better because it would truck just about the entire tier, which is why it wasn't even allowed. Thus, Slowbro remained stuck in BL, resigned to only be used whenever a bored, enterprising OU player skimmed through the BL list and wanted to mess around with it, only for them to conclude that yeah, Slowbro can do some fun stuff, but it's ultimately outclassed. Who knew? Advance was pretty much a non-gen for Slowbro, though as far as non-gens go, being too good for UU is one of the best versions of those you can get. In Gen 4, Slowbro gained reliable recovery in Slack Off, and suddenly it had a new lease on life. It could actually use that monstrous defense stat repeatedly. Of course, it also had to contend with being a physical wall that was weak to Gen 4's newly physical pursuit, but it can now work around this. Though it was never a true OU Pokemon, Slowbro had a unique niche. Early in Diamond and Pearl, everyone was terrified of Gyarados, which had finally gained physical waterfall and was terrorizing everything with Dragon Dance. With Hidden Power Electric, Slowbro was one of the strongest Gyarados counters in the game. It also spread paralysis beautifully, making it an excellent sleeper pick on various balance teams. There was a well-known team in the Platinum era that utilized Slowbro's unique T-Wave talents to support the monstrous substitute Rhyperior. In general, Slowbro was difficult to take down in a way Suicune wasn't, thanks to its reliable recovery, and in a way Starmie wasn't because of its enormous physical bulk, the synthesis of which could be seen in how effortlessly it switched into Metagross without missing a beat. It had to be careful when hitting the field sometimes though. For instance, its lower special defense meant it wasn't an ideal Heatran answer, but if it managed to hit the field and plant its feet a little, i.e. not being forced into Slack Off, many common offensive teams really hated switching into it. Things like Dragon Dance Salamence and Scarf Flygon would just get trounced 1v1, while even many Pokemon that could threaten it like Gengar couldn't come in safely at all. Slowbro could even get around its pursuit weakness with not just the ruinous effect of Thunder Wave, but with how Flamethrower made quick work of the #1 Pokemon throughout Platinum and much of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Scizor. Additionally, wasn't this the generation that introduced close combat? Yes, it was. But at first, Slowbro's fighting resist wasn't as useful as you'd think. Even beyond the obvious exception of that half-grass Breloom and its Seed Bomb, most other fighters threatened it quite handily. Early in Diamond and Pearl, everyone was gushing over Heracross, whose Mega Horn ensured Slowbro kept his distance, and Infernape's Grass Knot meant Slowbro couldn't too reliably resist those scary dual stabs. Lucario was using Choice Specs early on, which threatened Slowbro with not just Shadow Ball, but the sheer power of Aura Sphere on the special side. But eventually it eclipsed Heracross with its Swords Dance set, which threatened Slowbro with boosted Crunch. Though Slowbro was so tanky it could actually take one, it still wasn't ideal. However, there was one fighting type that Slowbro countered better than almost anything else in the game: Machamp. This was always useful, but as Machamp paralysis spam teams eventually took over the metagame, this became Slowbro's calling card, its defining role, a Machamp counter. Slowbro was so excellent into Machamp, not just for its physical bulk and fighting resist, but because of its own tempo ability, which guarded it against confusion. You know how would-be checks like Hippowdon and Skarmory would be overwhelmed by smacking themselves in the face as Machamp continued to hit them? Yeah, Slowbro had none of that nonsense. It also used its low speed to its favor, as going second against Machamp meant it was taking weakened damage from Payback, getting hit just as hard as Stone Edge, so not hard at all in other words. Beyond Machamp, Slowbro's previous talents against Gyarados were also highly valuable, especially given how the two tended to be paired together, and as some nice bonuses, Infernape had shifted towards physical sets whose U-turn Slowbro had to watch out for, but was otherwise a great answer to, and Swords Dance Lucario had long since dropped Crunch in favor of much more pressing coverage options like Bullet Punch, Ice Punch, and Stone Edge, opting to use Pursuit to bridge the gap against Crunch's targets. With Slowbro's bulk and T-Wave, it could take on both, and it especially enjoyed shutting down the newly popular Scarf Lucario. Beyond fighting types, A healthy Slowbro was also a sturdy answer to Ironhead Jirachi. Eventually, Machamp was banned, and Slowbro's niche thus disappeared, but it will always be remembered as the Pokemon that countered the uncounterable. Of course, at this time, Slowbro was UU, and there it was also quite good. It was pretty simple. It took physical hits from Kabutops, Azumarill, and Feraligatr better than almost anything else, while also eating up Swords Dance Toxicroak, and generally being helpful into Blaziken and stuffing late-game Primeape, all while acting as a generally useful bulky water. Slowbro's main problem was its competition in this slot, because as a water, it would often be tasked with taking on fire types, and its low special defense was easy to prey on for various HP grasses from huge threats like Moltres, unlike Tier Queen Milotic, and even Slowking, despite being an NU, eventually proved itself the more useful UU Slow Twin for how well it took on Moltres, while still packing Slowbro's solid fighting resist, making it much better into Blaziken. Its great special defense meant it could also check Nasty Plot variants of Toxicroak, making it a near perfect switch. However, if you had another method of answering Moltres, most commonly on stall teams with Chansey, but Pokemon like specially defensive Arcanine or Regirock on more balanced teams could also help out. Slowbro was still a fine Pokemon. Its physical bulk stood out among its fellow waters, making it much more difficult to threaten with big hitters like Kangaskhan, and on the occasion that Blaziken used Swords Dance over its more standard mix set, in which case you'd much rather have Slowbro going up against it. Slowbro was among the most blessed Pokemon that received the hidden ability from Gen 5's Dream World. Here it received Regenerator and truly came into its own as the Slowbro that we still recognize today. Suddenly, its already impressive physical bulk became more than just the numbers. It was effectively even tankier because of how easily Regenerator reinforced its hit taking, allowing it to come in again and again against many of the scariest Pokemon running around. This UU Pokemon quickly took off as a secret favorite of good players to completely throttle the high-octane offensive powerhouses that were spammed on standard teams. Slowbro first appeared for its ability to ward off the newly speed-boosting, buffed high-jump-kicking Blaziken that was well on its way to getting banned. Slowbro stood in its way, and thanks to its secondary stab Psychic, it would check a Blaziken less afraid of water moves under the sun. The amazing part, though, it wasn't even that Slowbro answered Blaziken and a whole other murderous rows of threats. It was that Slowbro could answer Blaziken, take some hits, maybe even trading much of its health to take a Swords Dance Life Orb Shadow Claw if it meant taking Blaziken out, and then it would switch out and still be able to take on these other threats. That is what Regenerator did that all the recovery moves in the world couldn't. Even something as resilient as Hippowdon or Gliscor was jealous of the playmaking Slowbro was afforded by this ability. Slowbro could switch into Choice Band Terrakions close combat with Stealth Rock and Sand. It takes the hit nicely, but a Regenerator lacking Slowbro would be forced to slack off if it wanted to safely switch in again later. With Regenerator though, Slowbro's going on the offensive. It's Thunder Waving, it's Scalding, or it's double switching into a teammate, and despite not actively healing, it's still going to stay healthy enough to come in and do it all over again. This made the UU Slowbro one of the most immortal walls in OU. Plus, look at what else it was taking on in addition to the aforementioned Blaziken and Terrakion. Sand Rush Excadrill, another Pokemon that would be banned. Garchomp, Landorus Incarnate, which in Black and White 1 used physical attacks, Dragonite, Lucario, Gliscor, even Rain Toxicroak. Slowbro was so good against such a cavalcade of borderline broken beasts that it quickly established itself as one of the best choices on all manner of sand balance and stall teams, which continued into and lasted throughout Black and White 2. The specifics of what it answered shifted, but Slowbro's ability to check the likes of Dragonite and ground types was eternal. It was especially useful as a counter to the terrifying Mamoswine, which rose specifically as an answer to sand teams. With Slowbro, you could have a sand team that actually answered Mamoswine well. Despite its low special defense, Slowbro also acted as a solid backup check to Black and White 2's Keldeo. Slowbro was an excellent OU choice despite spending the generation in UU, where it was also excellent. UU was dominated by fire and fighting type offense from Victini to Mienshao, and Slowbro repeatedly answered these beautifully. It had to be careful of coverage, of course, from Victini dipping into its move pool to Heracross's ever-present Megahorn, but it was among the best, most consistent options to stifle such a major portion of the metagame. It went beyond fire and fighting, of course. Its general hit-taking meant it could take on the likes of Flygon beautifully. That was another great thing about Regenerator. You could switch in, take even a sizable hit from something like Choice Band Outrage, and pivot out, and be just fine to come in again later. With Scald, Slowbro was also helpful at pivoting around many variants of offensive Snorlax, and as always, between Scald and Thunderwave, Slowbro was not just a status spreading supporter extraordinaire, but made it brutally difficult for the Pokemon that actually could threaten it, like Zapdos, to switch in. Slowbro rocked Gen 5 all the way to the bank. Slowbro wasn't used much in notable tournaments, but Martin Brookshaw used it on a really interesting Trick Room team to get 13th at the Australian Nationals. Slowbro is one of the slowest setters, which makes it perfect support for Martin's Electros and Abomasnow in Trick Room, while they outspeed and nuke everything. Congratulations on the excellent placement. No more permanent sand being coarse and rough and getting everywhere in the way of Slowbro's beloved leftovers. No more permanent rain amping water moves up to obnoxious extents. Slowbro was set to regenerate all over the competition in Gen 6, and that's exactly what it did, becoming a true OU Pokemon again for the first time since Gen 1. Once again, it was a staple on metagame defining balance teams, ones that, with Pokemon like Ferrothorn, Gliscor, Heatran, and Scarf Tyranitar, almost looked like they could have been plucked out of Gen 5. With Thunderwave, Slowbro was one of the most dependable answers in the game to one of the most difficult to answer new threats, Mega Charizard X, while excelling against offensive Talonflame and the newly buffed of Azumarill as well. It was also effective once again at assisting against Keldeo, especially since Hydro Pump had its base power nerf from 120 to 110. Incidentally, the Draco Meteor nerf from 140 to 130 also meant that Slowbro was now not nearly as easily chased out by Latios, and thus became even more irritating for many offensive teams to switch into and defeat. Finally, its ground-stifling talents were still ever so useful against the defining quadfecta of Excadrill, Garchomp, Gliscor, and Landorus T. After Aegislash's ban, Slowbro became even tougher to take out, especially because it was one of the few counters to one of the megas that exploded in the wake of Aegislash's ban, Medicham, a ferocious KO machine that Slowbro sat on with delight. That was throughout X and Y, a period in which Slowbro also assisted against several variants of the dangerous Protean Greninja that would be banned early into Gen 6, and in Gen 6, Slowbro got even better. It was an amazing answer, nearly perfect against the controversial new Mega Metagross, which came close to receiving the ban hammer. It was also similarly nigh unbreakable for another new Mega, Lopunny. This alone would have been fine, especially since the lack of Permasand and the ease of healing with Regenerator and Slack Off led Slowbro to experimenting with Rocky Helmet as its item, letting it play punishing offense while acting in its usual defensive capacity. However, there was another leftovers alternative, Slowbro Knight. That's right, Slowbro got a Mega Evolution. But wait, Mega didn't have Regenerator. What was the point? Well, you know those balance teams that Slowbro was such a staple of? Those came to truly dominate the metagame at several points in Gen 6, and these teams liked having a late game setup cleaner. Either Swords Dance Gliscor or a Calm Minder, usually Clefable, sometimes Mega Latias, or even Reuniclus. And yeah, Slowbro. Calm Mind Slowbro wasn't a Calm Minder in the same way Suicune was. Whereas Suicune was all about the boost and had to be more particular about switching into battle, Slowbro was a defensive Pokemon first and foremost that switched in and out of battle early on, and happened to be able to go for a Calm Mind sweep late game. It was especially good at this because Psyshock hitting the defense stat meant it dominated Clefable in a Calm Mind war. Basically, Mega Slowbro was an extension of this concept. You wouldn't actually Mega it for most of the game. You'd just use it as a regular Slowbro, countering stuff and regenerating. However, when it came time to sweep, Mega Slowbro ensured you swept hard. Its ability Shell Armor meant you couldn't crit it, allowing it to Calm Mind and Slack Off without fear. Forget getting lucky if you just hit it enough times, it ensured you were toast. You also weren't breaking through it on the physical side, as its defense stat exploded to a tremendous base 180. Basically, imagine Gen 1 Reflex Slowbro if you couldn't crit it, and that's something like what Mega Bro was like. To cap things off, it hit much harder once it Mega'd, going to a Latios equivalent base 130 special attack. In some situations, you'd Mega not to go for a Calm Mind sweep, but for offensive defensive purposes, both gaining the extra physical defense and the immediate power needed in order to take out something like a threatening boosted Gliscor. Plus, even before it Mega Evolved, Slowbro made use of its Mega Stone as it weakened the power of Knockoff. Suddenly, Weavile and Bisharp were much less threatening to it, while Slowbro was also able to pivot into the knockoff spamming Assault Vest Tornadus Therian. There was usually hardly any opportunity cost to it either, as it was generally on teams that looked something like Heatran, Ferrothorn, Gliscor, Clefable, Scarftar, and Slowbro. Where else is your Mega going to go? Mega T-Tar is great, but you need Scarftar's speed. You basically get only the upsides with it. As a bonus, Mega Slowbro also recalled Gen 1 in that it also had a niche in Ubers. It had just the right set of traits to assist against several of the scariest Pokemon in the tier: Primal Groudon, Mega Salamence, and Ho-Oh. Sometimes it even ran Iron Defense, which, especially if it Mega Evolved, meant even boosting physical threats, including Swords Dance Mega Lucario, Arceus Ground, and the normal type Extreme Killer Arceus wouldn't be able to break it. It was a niche pick, but as far as these go, it was an excellent one, and Slowbro ruled Gen 6. And as for VGC, Mega Slowbro debuted a lackluster amount of usage, its highest placement being Matt Vibert at 10th place at the Florida Regionals. Unfortunately, not much else is known about this Mega Slowbro, but congratulations on placing well. Slowbro in Toxapex's OU? It's more likely than you think. Of course, Toxapex was the tier's dominant new regenerating water type, defining the metagame, yeah. But you know what Slowbro did? Eat earthquakes for breakfast. It started as a counter to the monstrously broken Zygarde in late Sun and Moon, and for the pedants out there, yes, Zygarde used Thousand Arrows and not Earthquake. However, even after Zygarde's ban in Ultra Sun and Moon, Slowbro proved itself to be an excellent OU choice, once again devouring Exca, Chomp, Landoti, and especially the specially defensive Swords Dance Gliscor that wound up taking over OU for a time. Slowbro was also superb into another threat that came to dominate the metagame. Rain teams loved their nearly uncounterable Mega Swampert, but Slowbro sat on it hard. You know what else Slowbro took on that Toxapex couldn't? Mega Medicham, whose psychic terrain boosted Zen Headbutts Slowbro ate for breakfast. Devouring Halucha and Megazard X were two more specialties on the house. In addition to its usual leftovers, Slowbro could also slap on its Megastone and become truly absurd defensively, while really helping counter Gliscor. Mega Bro also gained the ability to withstand even choice-banded Kartana's Leaf Blade. In addition to its unwavering defensive excellence, Slowbro also offered some offensive firepower with Z Crystals. Its primary choice was Psychium Z, which turned its already solid Future Sight into immediate, crushing Psychic-type power, capable of destroying physically defensive Toxapex and helping overpower something like Megazard X. Icium Z was also effective to turn Ice Beam into Sub-Zero Slammer, letting Slowbro destroy Gliscor, and of course, both Z Crystals, alongside the Megastone, were superb for softening the blow of and potentially even letting it pivot into Knockoff. Now, as good as Slowbro was in OU, it wasn't a part of the tier by usage, but before we look at its return to the lower tiers, we first have to mention its return to Ubers. In early Sun and Moon, it was an essential part of several stall teams, forming an amazing regenerator core alongside Ho-Oh, in addition to countering Primal Groudon, Ho-Oh itself, Mega Lucario, and Extreme Killer, and Ground Arceus as before. Slowbro was even better into Mega Ments now that Aerolate had been nerfed. However, arguably the most important target was the towering Zygarde Complete. Slowbro was able to both go the distance against it and threaten it. Then Ultra Sun and Moon came around, and Slowbro gained an even more important target. Well, potentially two. Not just Swords Dance Dustmane Necrozma, but that which could potentially transform into Swords Dance Ultra Necrozma. Sadly, Mega Bro tapered off. What it could do was great, but opportunity cost was huge, especially for a Mega, and the presence of Marshadow, a physical attacker whose Ghost Stab effortlessly cut through it, knocked it down several pegs. Still, Mega Slowbro had a niche, just not quite as strong as it had been early in the gen. It was a strange, wonderful time to see Mega Slowbro and Alolan Muk alongside Ho-Oh as a part of unbreakable Uber stall teams. Slowbro was excellent in UU, even after Gliscor left the tier to go terrorize OU, prompting Slowbro to follow it there while continuing to perform excellently in the tier below. Base Slowbro was already quite good, and Mega Slowbro was even better. Though Mega competition was strong, Mega Bro was great because of how it ensured you the bulk to take on the monstrous Z-move boosters running around. One of Slowbro's best traits was how well it did into the monstrous Terrakion, but of course it had to be careful around the possibility of Swords Dance and Rocky MZ. However, if you switch Slowbro into Terrakion and see them Swords Dance, you know they're going for it. So rather than trying to switch around to try and burn the Z on a prediction, which you might not be able to afford and might not work anyway, you can Mega and take Terrakion out, bringing major consistency against a threat that is otherwise almost impossible to not lose a Pokemon to. If it could take on Z Terrakion, most everything else was a cinch for Slowbro. It was outstanding into the other defining base 108 speed fighters, Infernape and Cobalion, and shut down the highly dangerous Mega Aerodactyl as well. In addition to also shutting down Pokemon like Mega Aggron and generally being tough to take out, Slowbro Slowbro could also provide excellent offensive support with Future Sight. Its natural bulk was so good that it could even run a modest nature and max special attack to really make them sting and enable its wall-breaking teammates to the fullest. And yet Slowbro still wasn't even UU by usage. It wound up all the way in RU, where, surprise surprise, it did its usual Slowbro things to superb effect, while mixing things up by slotting in Colbur as an anti-knockoff tool, helping turn the tables on would-be threats like Pangoro and Drapion, or beyond knockoff, letting it stay in against other dark coverage like that of Mega Blastoise's Dark Pulse. All the while with Scald, Ice Beam, and Psyshock, Slowbro effortlessly threatened most of the tier in return. Again, just Slowbro things. And with its Mega Stone attached, Slowbro did those Slowbro things a little too well. The Calm Mind Sweeper both unbreakable and destroyed everything, and thus Slowbro Knight was banned shortly after dropping into the tier. Gen 7 was another majorly adventurous, successful one for Slowbro. Slowbro was not preferred as a Trick Room setter like the dominating Mimikyu, but it did have two really good placements. At the San Jose Regionals, Patrick Smith used Slowbro as a Trick Room setter to spam Surf to boost Gastrodon's special attack with Storm Drain. Matias Rura got 4th at the Santiago Regionals with the same Trick Room core. Also, since Oblivious was buffed in Gen 6 to be immune to Taunt, this gives Slowbro another niche as a Trick Room setter. Congratulations to them on their great placements. Despite UU in the Isle of Armor DLC, Slowbro remained an excellent OU Pokemon, and actually got better with the expanded Pokedex of the Crown Tundra DLC, where it returned to its status as a true OU Pokemon in its most obnoxious, unkillable iteration yet. First of all, heavy-duty boots allowing it to ignore hazards meant it was even easier for it to take hits and then regenerate to perfect or near perfect health without needing to slack off, letting it switch in again and again and again without being pressured to manually heal, and instead letting it pile on the pressure itself. That said, Colbur Berry was also an excellent option for letting Slowbro turn the tables against the incredibly dangerous Weavile. Additionally, Slowbro was even more immortal now since Pursuit had been removed from the game, making it feel almost impossible to punish. Slowbro really leaned into its Future Sight in this gen. In the early Crown Tundra, Future Sight alongside certain threats like Urshifu felt so genuinely unstoppable, several good players were calling for a Future Sight ban. This sentiment didn't last, not least because Urshifu was soon banned, but Future Sight's metagame dominating excellence never wavered. It became one of Gen 8 OU's most defining traits in the way that it enables monsters like the other Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and the aforementioned Weavile. It wasn't just Future Sight either, it was Future Sight in conjunction with Teleport, which Gen 8 had buffed into a negative priority switch move. Now, Teleport alone would have already been an amazing tool for Slowbro. Bulky Pokemon that switch into battle often make superb use of switch moves to translate their defensive utility into opportunities for their offensive teammates. See, most famously, Landorus Therian and its U-turn. The fact that Teleport was a negative priority move was perhaps a little redundant given Slowbro's non-existent speed, but it was still useful to ensure that Slowbro would go second. While fast switch moves are great, slow switch moves are also uniquely excellent to ensure the Pokemon coming in does so safely, thus enabling frail attackers such as Weavile, or before its ban, Cinderace. Now, the combination of Future Sight and Teleport or Future Port, that was just incredible. If Slowbro didn't want to teleport right away, it could set up a Future Sight, then use its incredible bulk alongside Regenerator, and the fact that it remained unscathed by hazards to devour a hit from most switch-ins and freely teleport to its threatening teammate, which would have hit the field for free and have a Future Sight hanging in the air to push its offensive threat to truly unwallable levels. It made switching into monsters like Buzzwole and Choice Band Tyranitar utterly nightmarish. For such an amazing defensive Pokemon to also be so good at facilitating wall breaking was just incredible, and the fact that Slowbro could so effortlessly chain its teleports with other switch moves on its team made it even more low risk, high reward. This strategy of endlessly chaining switch moves together was referred to as the Vortex, which the opponent continuously forced to switch out would be trapped in. This strategy exploded in usage, not just because it was so good, but because with its Future Sight resistance and Regenerator to help offset its damage, as well as that sustained during an attempt to stave off an opponent's Vortex, Slowbro was one of the best answers to its own strategy. With how the Vortex attempted to go the distance through switch moves alongside Boots, Regenerator, and healing, one's own Vortex strategies would leave them best equipped to deal with it. Slowbro would often be the best answer to an opposing Slowbro, or Slowking for that matter, but while Slowking was also excellent for how it dealt with threats like Tapu Lele, Slowbro's physical defense meant it was better, if only slightly, for taking on dangerous physical threats like Melmetal, Garchomp, Excadrill, Barraskewda, and the aforementioned Urshifu Rapid Strike, which is why Slowking was UU, despite being an integral part of OU. Either way, the Slow Twins would hope to lose the speed tie against each other so they could teleport second and gain an advantage, though it'd likely be short-lived, given that the Slow Twin that had gone first would probably just pop in and start things all over again. The most ridiculous part of all, since it was so impossible to make progress against Slowbro's immortality, many a battle was reduced to both players running each other out of teleport PP. Yes, actually. And remember, teleport has 32 PP. Anyway, Slowbro was one of OU's most defining, unstoppable Pokemon. But wait, there's more. A challenger from Galar is approaching, slowly. That's right, it's Galarian Slowbro. Galarian Slowbro, henceforth referred to by its common nickname, Glowbro, is a very different Pokemon. Its design is strange. It's poison psychic with a stat spread geared more towards overall balance than its physically defensive special attacking Cantonian counterpart. It's got base 100 in both attacking stats, and it still has a solid base 95 defense, but has actually downgraded in terms of special defense, going from base 80 to 70. True to its name, it's still slow. So how does this work? More balanced approaches don't tend to work when the Pokemon in question is so slow, even though it's still got Regenerator at its disposal. What does Glowbro actually do? Generally, it's, well, a Calm Minder bolstered by Regenerator and Slack Off. Usually it's using Sludge Bomb and Scald for their coverage and dishing out a status before going for the Calm Mind sweep, though something like Scald is replaced by Psyshock for secondary stab and winning Calm Mind Wars, or Flamethrower to more immediately threaten steals. Its typing making it good for physical defense once again, thanks to the quadruple fighting resist. Additionally, the poison immunity lets it perma-wall bulky grasses like Tangrowth and Amoonguss, and generally assists its already incredible longevity. However, at first, Glowbro started in RU in the Isle of Armor, running an Assault Vest set to bolster its special hit taking, while getting to bombard the opponent to the full extent of its kaleidoscopic coverage. Especially enjoying its signature move, Shell Sidearm, the 90 base power poison stab with a nice 20% poison rate, along with Future Sight. It was then discovered that the aforementioned Calm Mind set was pretty broken, with it effortlessly, often actively outlasting the few Pokemon that could check it. But before they could ban it, it moved up to UU by usage. As it turns out, its Assault Vest set was really good there too, and that's where things got weird. At this time, Glowbro was actually in the same tier as Cantonian Slowbro, which, remember, started out in UU, to very strange effect where somehow they were both the best Pokemon in the tier. This was also Noivern, but yes, both forms of Slowbro ruled the roost. They were so good, they created this ludicrous dynamic where if you could, you would run both on the same team. Thank goodness for Species Clause. So what do? You run Slowking alongside them, of course. Dual Slow Twins were generally excellent. Slowbro beat just about everything, checking Noivern, Mamoswine, Cobalion, then teleporting all over the place. But after the Crown Tundra DLC, it took its game to OU, as described previously. Before that though, UU also discovered the brokenness of Calm Mind Glowbro, and the tier more or less warped entirely around it until the Crown Tundra dropped. The optimal setup was to use Calm Mind Glowbro alongside Slowking. Also during the Isle of Armor, Glowbro made some appearances in OU to gimmicky yet infuriating effect. Rather than the longevity-focused Assault Vest and Calm Mind sets it was running in the lower tiers, it went for fast-paced offense. For some reason, this Pokemon with slow in its name also got the ability Quick Draw, which gave it a 30% chance to move first, basically a built-in Quick Claw that had the same odds as a Scald Burn. When paired with Quick Claw, Glowbro had strong odds to just go first, and after a Nazi Plot boost, probably destroyed your Revenge Killer. This was used on some extremely cheesy hyper-offense teams and snatched a few tournament wins. Thankfully, this didn't last, seeing as its coin flip reliability means it's the epitome of inconsistency. Anyway, post-Crown Tundra, Glowbro dropped to NU, where after a brief yet overpowering spell, it took its Assault Vest and Calm Mind sets to the RU tier that it had risen through usage, and there it was similarly busted. Its counterplay was that wonderful combination of being both sparse and exploitable. Outside of Reuniclus and Clearsmog Gastrodon, the latter of which wasn't easy to fit on a moveset, everything else got worn down way too easily, outlasted by Regenerator and status spam. With the popular Shuka Berry, you could even threaten Glowbro with Zygarde 10% Styles and Arrows, and the reliability of Regenerator and Slack Off meant there was plenty of room for item experimentation to further mess with opponents. The knockoff thwarting Cobra Berry was similarly effective. Additionally, the cheesy Quick Claw Quick Draw set from OU, referred to as QCQD, was similarly obnoxious, with good odds to cut through just about every revenge killer imaginable. As a result, Slowbro was banned, and though it remained RUBL, it once again was excellent in UU with Calm Mind and Assault Vest once again. What a generation for the Slow brothers. Slowbro again is not the most used Trick Room setter, but it has a smattering of placements. It could wall Calyrex, Ice Rider, and Kyurem teams. These Slowbro actually ran Iron Defense and Body Press to hit these Pokemon super effectively, working off of Slowbro's amazing physical defense. It also improved matchups versus Kyogre and Tornadus teams by being reliable to set up Trick Room versus them, and of course being immune to Prankster Taunt. These three trainers on screen performed exceptionally well with this team, with Giovanni Kishke bringing Slowbro to 2 big tournaments. Congratulations to them, and thank you so much to Giovanni Kishke for the information. Gen 9 removed Slowbro's teleport and didn't even have the courtesy to give it the replacement chilly reception, which had been given to Slowking and Galarian Slowking, who previously lacked teleport. In this sense, Slowbro got the chilliest reception of all. Galarian Slowking was now OU, Jotonian Slowking was UU, and Slowbro returned to RU. Slowbro was still a fine Pokemon, of course, even with the halving of Slack Off PP, with its eternal regenerating defensive profile, alongside the ability to bolster itself against just about anything through terrestrialization. Funnily enough, it most enjoyed the toxic immunity of Terra Poison, meaning it basically turned into Slowbro, along with the still excellent bag of tricks that actually got a new buff of its own. New Psychic Stab in the form of Psychic Noise, disrupting the opponent's healing for 2 turns, a variant on the teammate enabling playstyle of Future Sight with the same delayed sort of stutter step rhythm. Slowbro excelled in RU as usual, countering Mamoswine, Rhyperior, Anti-Jirachi, and really could be used to play around just about everything thanks to Regenerator. It was good in UU as well, though rarer, which when it did show up, it delighted in shutting down such familiar faces like Keldeo, Metagross, Excadrill, Hawlucha, who all struggled to break through it as ever. Meanwhile, Slowbro once again briefly appeared in OU for Quick Claw Quick Draw fun. Isn't it just fun to hear? It's certainly fun to say. Even though it was of course a gimmick, it was maddening how often the gimmick worked, especially since the team it was used on had 5 other Quick Claw users. That moment of infamy aside, Slowbro dropped to PU, generally dejected by not just the halving of Slack Off PP, but the removal of Scald from its move pool, and it didn't even get Psychic Noise as compensation. However, in PU it thrived, wielding its fairy resistance en route to dominating Florges. It's also an effective answer to the irritating Pokemon Topama and Hisuian Decidueye. While its Calm mindset is still massively threatening, especially with how easily it sets up against staples like Bellyball and Altaria, Terrestrialization also goes a long way in helping it close out games. You know what its most common Terra type is? Water. That's right, it basically turns into Slowbro. Turns out, regardless of which Slowbro you have, it becomes most dangerous when it turns into the other Slowbro, fitting for a Pokemon that has had such an elite competitive history. And as for Gen 9 VGC, Slowbro once again had a few placements thanks to its niche as a taunt immune Trick Room setter, but there are quite few. Nonetheless, congratulations to these trainers for doing well with Slowbro on their team. And now we finally have our answer to our question. How great were Slowbro and Galarian Slowbro actually? Oh boy, they were really, really great. In fact, great is just the tip of the iceberg. Cantonian Slowbro alone has had an astonishing career, starting off the very generation by dueling Mewtwo and Ubers, a tier it would pop up in again a few more times. Overall though, it has mostly been astonishingly successful in OU and UU, while the occasional dip into RU really coming into its own upon gaining Regenerator in the 5th generation, letting it wall some of the most broken Pokemon in the game over and over, really reaching its unstoppable zenith in Gen 8 with heavy duty boots and teleport, to the point where much of the tier was warped around it, and talk of a Future Sight ban was briefly thrown around. Gen 8 is also where its Galarian form was introduced, and though it isn't quite at the level of its Cantonian variant, number 1, that's a crazy high bar, and number 2, it was still incredibly successful in its own right, utterly dominant in a number of tiers, and even briefly appearing to infuriating effect in OU in both Gens 8 and 9. There have been instances of both forms of Slowbro dominating a tier, and in Gen 9, they often take on each other's types when terrestrializing. Ultimately, Slowbro in any form has been one of the most extraordinarily successful Pokemon in competitive history. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel is Beast, Corman, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, Pretzel SP, Soljiro Sakura, Spavoon, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, Wardine for their major support of our videos.